Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Senator Chap Petersen with us today. Welcome, sir.
Woody, thank you for having me. It is great to be back in Richmond.
Talk to us about senioritis.
Okay. Woody, I'm the parent of 4 children, 3 of whom are teenagers, and have gone through a process which is known as, I call senioritis, which is you become a senior in high school, you have applied to and been accepted to college or decided what you're going to do after graduation, and yet you're still stuck in a classroom for 6 more months waiting to get to that final bell on graduation. And I think it tends to become a waste of time. It becomes a very stale experience. And so my bill on senioritis would basically allow school boards to come up with alternative work-based experiences. Maybe it's working in a hospital, maybe working in a restaurant, maybe working in a wood shop. I mean, based on your interests, but actually getting kids out of the classroom, getting them in a work environment, maybe working behind a TV camera, where they could either be apprentices, they could learn how to be a licensed trade, or they could just simply work, like I have a small business, a law office, where they could go to court and watch how you put on a case, how you defend a client, and just get some real world experience. I think it's good on a couple ways. First of all, we have very low unemployment in this state, so we have job openings that we're not taking away work from people. Secondly, I tend to believe this generation of young people, which I love them, I'm a father, has less work experience than we did when we were growing up. I think when we were in high school, you and I always had a part-time job. I delivered pizzas, I mowed lawns, and today's students, I think they're more likely to be focused on extracurriculars and college applications, which is all well and good, but I think they're missing the experience of actually showing up for work, dealing with customers, dealing with clients, and that's an important experience to have, even if you're 18 or 19 years old. So that's what my bill is designed to do, give freedom to school boards to implement these programs so that kids, the 12th grade, are not sitting in a classroom sort of going over lessons for yet another year, but rather are out in the community.
Any school boards do this already?
There are some work-based programs already, but the problem is we have so many requirements through every level of education, including 12th grade, that it's really impossible, unless you're going to literally replace a course, which is very hard to do. It's not possible right now. So my goal is, again, to take that second semester senior year, and instead of putting a kid through yet another semester of algebra or calculus when they've already studied it, or another semester of Spanish when they've already done 4 years, again, to get them out into the workplace where they can actually use these skills and get more practical experience.
And so this would give them credit for that experience.
And they would get credit. The idea is they would get academic credit, so they would not be doing paid work, but they would be getting academic credit for the work, and they'd still be eligible to play sports, play baseball, field hockey, band. They would still be enrolled students in the high school. It's just they wouldn't be on the campus the entire school day.
Now, what kind of reception have you received?
Well, my kids are not terribly enthused because, you know, I mean, listen, it's comfortable just being able to go to school and come home.
Right.
But most folks I've talked to kind of, you know, I talked to the pastor at my church, I talked to some other folks that are like, you know what, I think that's a great idea. And I think school boards are a little bit cautious because every time they hear a new idea, they think it's going to cost them money. I think it's the exact opposite. We always complain that we need to construct more school buildings and more school buildings, which presumes that education takes place in a building. It doesn't always. And so I think in some ways it can be a cost savings. So sure, there's going to be some pushback from some of the establishment players, but to use an overused word, I think it's a disruptive idea, and I think it's a good idea.
So would this be in the Education Health Committee?
It'll come through education. I'll probably make my presentation next week, And what we'd have to do is, if I can get the bill passed, we'd have to have the Board of Education come up with parameters of what would be an acceptable workplace experience, and then it would go to school boards to implement the program. And I understand some counties may not have those experiences. I can tell you in Fairfax City, I can pull together 24 small businesses in a heartbeat that could offer internships that would be real growth-related learning experiences.
Well, we've been here about 2 weeks now, but I know there's a looming deadline we talked about off camera. Talk to us about this tax conformity issue and how critical it is to get it done sooner rather than later.
Yes, sir. Well, Woody, I think it's January 23rd when we're filming this. February 1st, the state of Virginia will actually mail out tax returns. So if you're, if you're a state taxpayer, you own a state business, you're going to get that tax return in early February, and you'll give it to your CPA, and they will start filling out the amounts. The problem is right now, after the tax plan of 2017 from the federal government, we don't match up with the federal government in terms of our itemizations, in terms of our minimum standard deductions, in terms of all numbers of items, which means typically before 2017, you would take the aggregated gross income on your tax return from the federal return and simply drop that into your state return and then back out the amount of money you have to pay in taxes, which saves everybody a lot of paperwork and a lot of heartache. Right now we don't match up with the federal system because we haven't changed our laws to reflect their itemizations and their deductions. We need to do that, and we need to do that immediately. Now, the governor proposed a plan to do that, and one of the issues has become, well, our minimum standard deduction right now has not been moved forward. Should we move that forward and give a tax break to all Virginians, or should we keep the minimum standard deduction where it is right now and basically use the surplus that we're going to get because of the federal tax plan, use that surplus to accomplish things such as earned income tax credit, which could be refundable for low-income families. So if you're a low-income family and you pay income tax, you can now get the money back as opposed to simply paying more income tax. In my professional opinion as a state senator, I think this is an issue where both sides can win. I think the Republicans have a good idea to raise the minimum standard deduction and give tax relief to everybody. I agree with that. I also think that the governor has a very good idea that we're in a unique position to be able to help people that need it the most by going forward with earned income tax credit, which could give about $200 million in targeted tax relief for folks typically earning, say, under $30,000 a year.
So I take it the difference in terms of numbers is, I believe, $1.2 billion on one side versus 900 and some odd million.
Right. So we're going to come out ahead no matter what, just because of the tax cuts from 2017. Pretty much every Virginian, with some exceptions, will come out ahead. They'll do better. Now, if you itemize on your return like I do, let's say you give money to your church, you pay mortgage interest, you have significant medical expenses, you may itemize, and those itemizations have been capped on the new federal return. So some of those folks are going to lose under the new federal return, but by and large, the majority of people are going to win. The bottom line is, regardless of how you felt on the 2017 Trump tax plan, we need to marry up to the federal system. There's no plausible way for us to have our own tax system, because if that was the case, the CPAs would have to fill out the federal return, then turn around and fill out the state return, which would have it would be a disaster. So we need to get this done. We really need to get it done by February 1st, and if not by February 1st, I mean, as soon as possible, because otherwise it's going to really mess up our own tax collections.
Now, I understand there's an additional positive revenue impact as a result of a recent Supreme Court decision regarding internet sales taxes.
Right. Previous to today, or previous to last year, it was disputable whether you could collect sales on an internet transaction. Let's say I live in Virginia and I order from Amazon, maybe I order some gifts for Christmas, and they're shipped to my house. Amazon was previously not under a legal obligation to charge sales tax to me because they may ship from state of Washington. Now, under the new Supreme Court ruling, basically because the transaction occurs in Virginia and the recipient's in Virginia, there's what's called a nexus, so that the tax can be assessed. So they would charge the 6% sales tax that we would get in Fairfax County, and that money would then go to the state. That's a significant flow of money. And I've always supported it, and I've always supported it not because I necessarily want more taxes, but because it keeps a level playing field between online retailers and bricks and mortar retailers who have struggled. You know, look at Sears going out of business. So to me, I think it makes all the sense in the world. And so yes, if we simply take our existing state rates and apply them to the online transactions, that will be probably $200 to $400 million more a year.
Now, on the other side of the ledger, I understand there was an underestimation of cost associated with managed care. That's one item.
Yes, sir.
And the other item had to do with terminating the Northrop Grumman contract with the state on IT.
Yes, sir. Yes. I'm not quite sure what happened, and you know, that's probably going to be some type of autopsy on who messed that up. We significantly underestimated the cost that we would have, or maybe the better way to say it, we overestimated the cost savings we would have by going through a managed care plan for delivering Medicaid. Right now, all the Virginians that receive Medicaid, which is over 1 million, 90% of them go through a managed care plan, which means they're in a HMO just like you and me, and they have to go through a primary care physician in order to get care. And we push people into that model with the expectation it was going to save money. Somebody at some point vastly overestimated the amount of savings, and so it's coming back as, now that we have actual raw numbers, it's about $500 million more than what we anticipated. Medicaid is already a huge, you know, I think it's probably $3 to $4 billion right now in our budget. It's next to K-12 education. I think that's our biggest expenditure. So it's a big dollar amount. Not quite sure why that went wrong. I have some. You could probably do a separate show about Medicaid because I have some ideas about how we can make it more efficient. But the bottom line is that was avoidable and not good.
What about some of the other priorities in the governor's proposal dealing with, for example, increase in salaries for state workers and more specifically for teachers at the local level?
Sure. Well, as you know, the economy's been pretty good in Virginia. And knock on wood, hopefully we'll come out of this government shutdown pretty quickly. But the bottom line is, yeah, we're in a position to do things for people. I can tell you as a business owner, you know, about halfway through last year, I made a decision to raise the salaries of my own employees because I was in a position to do it. And I think as a state, we're in a position to do it. We need to do it. We need to raise salaries for teachers. We need to raise salaries for state employees. And so I support the governor's plan. Again, I've been through the recession when we, you know, we both delayed salary increases, and we changed the VRS plans to make it less expensive to the state.
Virginia retirement system.
Yes, Virginia retirement system. So I've been through the recession where you pull back and you're more stingy. When times are good, I think that's when you need to basically look at the employees that support you and say, hey, we're going to share the wealth.
And of course, more support for teachers in the budget in terms of nurses, psychologists, and people who actually help our young kids now who come to our schools with much more difficult problems than you and I had.
Woody, that's a conversation we could have, that schools in some way have become a support network for kids. Maybe in an earlier era it was churches. You know, maybe it was families. In a lot of ways, kids come to school to get a full meal, for childcare after school, for recreational opportunities, team sports, for arts and music, and for psychological support when they have depression and other psychological issues. And the school is what it is now. It's everyone attends it, and it provides a lot of social services. And we've made that decision that it's not just about learning in a classroom. It's a full support network, and we've embraced that. And I think by and large that's been a good thing.
Mentioned Amazon earlier. What impact, if any, is the location of the new headquarters in Crystal City going to have on your constituents?
Well, my constituents are sort of out 66, so we're not directly on the Route 1 corridor. Obviously, you know, Amazon moves in and more employees move in. It's going to boost our real estate market, boost consumer sales, retail sales, restaurant meals tax. You know, it's funny. I'm excited about Amazon. It's a great endorsement of our region. By the same token, Woody, you know, when I was a kid back in the 80s, all of the money coming into Northern Virginia was from the defense industry. Mm-hmm. And then something came along called the internet. And then it flipped. And then all the money was coming in through the internet. And now it seems like it's Amazon and retail sales. We don't know. I mean, 10 years ago, Amazon was a bookseller. So we don't know 10 years from now, is that still going to be the leading retailer? Is that going to be the leading commercial voice in America? Maybe, or we may be just onto some new technology. I'm excited about it. I mean, I could critique the deal and say, well, you're giving a big company breaks that you don't give small companies. I get all that. And I represent small companies. I am a small company. But by the same token, if you get the chance to bring LeBron James to town, you don't complain about the fact he may not go to every practice like his teammates.
Right. Fairfax County is going to have a big challenge. You mentioned housing, and of course housing prices have gone up already just with the announcement, but affordable housing for low-income residents is a problem now.
Yep.
So that's something they're going to have to face.
It absolutely is. I grew up in Fairfax City, and when I grew up there, it was really kind of a middle-class suburb where, you know, a lot of my classmates and neighbors, county employees, police officers, teachers. I mean, it was a very middle class existence. It's changed, and a lot of it is you now have very, you know, not very wealthy people, but people with money that work in IT that make six figures, and that has changed the housing stock. We've had a hard time hanging on to affordable housing, and this is in Fairfax City, which historically had a lower standard of living than the county. And you know, again, it's a good problem to have. I'd rather have that problem than the opposite, which is no one's moving in and it's just, you know, everyone's destitute. But I do think it's incumbent on the county to look for housing opportunities, particularly for folks that work in the community. It's tough when every time I talk to a police officer or a teacher, I say, well, where do you live? Well, I live in Stafford, I live in Front Royal, I live in Culpeper. And then they're commuting an hour every day. And we need to have the folks living in the community. We need a mix.
How is that I-66 toll issue still going?
I was doing so well. You know, it's I-66 is a huge construction project right now, and the hot lanes will come online probably in the next 12 to 24 months. I fought very hard to get access inside the Beltway. Right now they're tolling inside the Beltway. Mm-hmm. I fought very hard to get additional lanes inside the Beltway. That's finally coming online this year. It was about a year late from what we were promised, but you know, believe it or not, sometimes government doesn't keep their promises. You know, it's tough because the I-66 tolls are expensive, and I feel like people in Northern Virginia think, you know what, everyone else in the state has free highways. We have to pay to go anywhere. And there's a measure of truth to that. Now, you can still drive around the Beltway for free. You can still take general purpose lanes here and there. But by and large, especially on I-66, you have to pay tolls in order to travel, at least into D.C. And that's a continual issue of pushback.
What about this concept about reverse tolling?
Reverse tolling, is that where you, oh, yes.
You'd have it both ways.
Right. I support that, and here's why. And if you understand the geography of Fairfax County, you'll understand this. I live and work in Fairfax City. A lot of the younger people want to live in Arlington, which is across the Potomac River from D.C. They then commute out to Tyson's or Fairfax or Centerville or wherever. And so they're not paying tolls because they're not, quote, rush hour. But the concept of it is that basically they're getting a free pass while riding the same highways as the people that sort of do the standard, I live in the suburbs, commute to the city, are subsidizing that highway. Mm-hmm. So I do support reverse tolls. I think among other things it would bring down the toll amounts. Now we have a contract with a vendor, at least outside the Beltway. Inside the Beltway it's held by the state. So I think that's something that we're going to have to get to, because at some point we got to put a cap on these tolls.
And of course there's talk of, well, there's not talk. I-81 has to be fixed as well.
Right.
But there's talk about for folks who live in the Shenandoah Valley, having a $30 pass for a year. That's got to upset your constituents.
Well, as soon as people heard that, people kind of hit the roof, because $30 is typically what you pay to get into D.C. on I-66. So this concept of a season pass on I-81, I'd like to see, if you're going to do that, then you need to go statewide with that concept. Mm-hmm. And I will say, Woody, back in 2013, I voted against the transportation package. And what I said on the floor, and I stand by it to this day, was that when you did that, when you set up all these regional authorities and had them fund local improvements, you are balkanizing the state, and you're going to create each region where they're going to sort of self-subsidize, and they're going to be in a position where they're going to have to sort of game each other because they're not drawing from the same source any longer. And we're seeing that now, that up in Northern Virginia it's all tolls, and rather than saying, hey, let's do a highway general purpose in Northern Virginia, and we might toll during certain hours, but we're going to have untolled lanes and hours. Now you're going to have a situation people in Northern Virginia say, why am I paying tolls to go to work while people on 81 basically are toll free, even though their highway project is, if anything, more expensive?
Now, the Equal Rights Amendment passed the Senate.
Yes, sir.
Stalled considerably in the House. We don't even know if it's going to get a House vote, but there were a lot of people here Monday, lobby day, packing the halls. There were impassioned debates about the ERA. How did you vote?
I voted for the ERA, and I'm a big believer in you need to vote what your principles are, and I think the concept that no person should be discriminated on the basis of their sex is pretty basic concept, and it's a very American concept. And yes, we have laws on the books. Yes, we have Title IX and Title VII, but the bottom line is there's no harm and considerable benefit for going ahead and enacting this. Now, what's the legal significance? And maybe none. I'm not convinced by the arguments that you can kind of go back and replay the 1970s and it goes on the U.S. Constitution. But you know what? I'll let the legal scholars hash that out. I think what's more important to me is that as a state, we say, look, we support equal rights for women. It's in our own state constitution. I don't see the downside for that. And I'm puzzled that the Republicans not only would vote against it, but they're not even going to allow the whole House to vote on it. That to me doesn't make any sense.
Another constitutional amendment in various forms relates to redistricting.
Yep.
A commission, either bipartisan or nonpartisan.
Right.
How do you come out on those issues?
Well, I support redistricting reform. I would rather have it be nonpartisan. I think if it's bipartisan, then basically you get a gerrymandered map which protects both parties as opposed to protecting one party. And so I'm not a big fan of that. I think at every point in your career you sort of cross a bridge. And at some point as a politician you have to say, is it the number one goal is for me to get reelected or to come back here next term? And if it's not the number one goal and you cross that bridge, then at that point you're less concerned about, hey, am I going to have a district around? I don't care. And for me, Woody, I crossed that bridge a few years ago. I have a lot of things going on in my life which I enjoy, you know, being a dad, being a football coach, playing sports, practicing law. And I love being in the legislature. It's been one of the greatest experiences of my life, but I never felt like I had to have that position in order to justify my life. And I think in terms of redistricting, that's important because, look, if someone nonpartisan or you know outside the system was to draw a map and my district goes away or it gets merged into somebody else's district and it's not plausible for me to run, I would have zero regrets about just saying, hey, you know, I did this for 18 years and I'm proud of what I did and it's on to the next thing.
And of course, for something to happen, it has to happen this year because there has to be
right, you have to get it through this assembly and then the next assembly, then it'll go to the voters in 2020 to be approved, hopefully, and then it would then be utilized for the 2021 census. So if we don't get it done now, it's not happening until 2030. And who knows who'll be around then.
Yeah, and of course it's going to be interesting to see how things play out in this year's upcoming elections because we now have a federal district court order, I believe, that's going to potentially upset the balance in the House of Delegates.
Yeah, and the alternative is like you said, we could have a situation where we're going to have judges writing our districts year after year. And I'm not a fan of that. Nobody should be. You know, the legislature, yes, we could do it. We did it for years. But the problem is with computer technology, it's become so sophisticated to map that I think it's really diminished the process. And I'll give you an example. I'm a legacy through multiple generations. My great-grandfather was a state senator, and he represented Fairfax and Loudoun counties. And back in those days, everyone got 2 counties. And they didn't really count the people. There was no one man, one vote concept. And they didn't have computers. So it's just like, there's a county, there's a county. And not that that was a better system. In some ways it was a worse system, but it was a simpler system. And simplicity is important. And I just think now, you know, you got some of these districts that snake all over the place, and it's not a good look.
Electric utility regulation, you have some legislation dealing with that this session.
Yes, sir. Last year I fought very hard against the utilities bill that was taking the rate freeze, excess money paid to the utilities, and basically giving it back to the ratepayers, and restoring SCC, State Corporation Commission oversight. My bills were defeated. I was on the losing side of that issue. I'm bringing back a bill that will basically restore SCC oversight. So if the utilities overcharge on your electricity rates, you can have that money refunded back to you. That, to me, I think is one of our rights as Virginians. And so, yeah, I'll be pushing that.
Sports betting. I
Yes,
know
sir.
You've got some legislation dealing with that.
Right. Yes. No. I brought a bill this year on sports betting, which basically would legalize betting on professional sporting events.
That's a result of a Supreme Court decision.
Exactly. In 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down congressional legislation which had banned interstate or sports betting within the states, and it banned it just based on the fact that, you know, there's no authority in the Constitution to ban that type of legislation. So I brought a bill saying, look, we've got sports betting in West Virginia, D.C., Maryland. We ought to have it in Virginia. You have, you know, pro sports. People already bet on it. Might as well do it in Virginia. We keep the revenue. My bill would dedicate the revenue to the community college system. I would estimate it's, you know, very roughly around $50 million a year. So it's not, you know, within a $20 billion annual state budget. It's a small amount, but it's a significant amount. But the key thing to me is my bill is different than other bills in that it's based on a bricks and mortar approach, that people would actually go to sites. They would go to a sports book. You know, it might be a place that has food and beverage, and they would actually, there's an entertainment factor. It's trying to get people out of their basement, get their face out of the phone, and get them socializing with other people. And, you know, gambling is a form of entertainment. I get that. It's not something I do personally. You know, I'm a Redskins fan, so I'd probably be broke in a couple years if I followed my instincts. But, yeah, that is one of my bills.
Got about a minute left. Campaign finance.
Yes, very quickly. I have a bill supported by the governor to limit campaign donations to $10,000 per candidate per campaign cycle. I think there's arguments about whether or not you have a First Amendment right to donate money. I think you do, but I also think, like other First Amendment rights, there can be a limit on it. And once you give somebody 10 grand, I think you've expressed your opinion.
Thank you, Senator Chap Petersen. Good luck the remainder of the session.
Thank you, Woody. It's always great to be here.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.